Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cill. I have a song that is called All You've Got. It's a song that speaks to our role in fighting corruption together. So give it all you've got. I don't need to be president to be part of my government. My voice is my platform. The goal is to reform. Silence is golden till your conscience gets frozen. Government for the people, no be people for the government. Government by the people, not government buying people. The blame we push around today will come back to torment us. The bridge we fail to fix today will fall upon the children. So I'm asking you to give it all you got. Oh, I'm asking you to give it all you got. We sabi talk, we dey analyze, yet we fail to realize the power of doing right, good conscience and foresight. Corruption there, our blood is taking over like a flood. What's meant for the people should go to the people. No more spectators, don't live your life on the internet. The blame you push around today will come back to torment. The bridge we fail to fix today will fall upon the children. So I'm asking you to give it all you got. I'm asking you to give it all you got. So I'm asking you to give it all you got. Yeah, give it all you've got. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cill. Wonderful. Next up, we've got the Sixsters all the way from Ukraine via Germany.
Hello everyone, as it's already been said, we're the Sixsters, we're a rock band. Yeah, and as a very young band, we sometimes face the problem of older generations, of older corrupt generations, trying to block our way to success. But yeah, you know, we prove that we can overcome these obstacles by being just our true selves. And actually, all you need is love, and the song is about love, and it's called Hold. Do you really wanna go to see amazing beauty show? Go to the sunrise, only once, no twice. There's no time for joking. We're so tired of waiting to act like a savior. To feel the fresh and sunny wind, which will lead us to the dream, and nothing gonna save you. To feel the fresh and sunny wind, which will lead us to the dream. Let us to the dream. Hold my hand, hold my hand. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. They will never find us, they will never catch us. Up and up, of the storm. This is what we're born for. What we're born for. Hold my hand. Don't be afraid. They will never find us. They will never catch us. Up. They will never find us. They will never catch us. Thank you. Come to the Break Free Festival tonight. We'll play at 9:30. And have fun, please. More.
All right, one last final performance before we let you get back to business as usual. But tonight will not be business as usual. You'll be at this lovely location, all with us. There will be shuttle buses provided at the end of the conference, so make sure to join us tonight. And to end off the performances for now, I'd like to invite all the way from Africa's warm heart, Malawi, Faith Mussa.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I've already been introduced. I'm Faith Mussa from Malawi. The song that I'm going to do is titled Don't Run Away.
It's a nation of peace, best known for its beauty. People with a smile, but they're crying inside. It's a nation of corruption, mass looting and deception. It's like an immigration, but from heaven to hell. I can't run away. I can't run away. I can't run away, no. This is my country. I can't run away. Don't run away. I grew up thinking one day things will get better. I ended up queuing for sugar, then sleeping on a petrol station. You're drinking your coffee, sitting on our billions, shopping on our taxes. Ziwa mbuzi kakondwa, amalonda Africa. You can't run away. You can't run away. You can't run away, no. Malawi is my country. You can't run away. Don't run away. Look to your left, then look to your right. Tayamba kusanka na kochokela, antu andale atinamiza. Look to your left, then look to your right. Tayamba kusanka na kochokela, antu aboza atipusiza. Kaya ndiwo wakumpoto, kaya ndiwo wakumwera, kaya kwano ni pakati. Do you really love me like you claim? Like you claim? Like you claim? Do you really love me like you claim? Like you claim? Like you claim? Do you really love us like you claim?
Thank you very much. Remember to join us tonight at Lucas Care's Prison. See you tonight. God bless.
Before we... Can anybody hear me? Yes, you can. Lovely. Before we move back to business, I want to remind you who was there on stage with us. That was Faith Mussa. You have also seen the Sixsters and Cill Soul. And that was a sneak peek of tonight's performance from some of our Fair Play Music ambassadors. They are from Malawi, from Nigeria, and from Ukraine. They are engaged in the fight against corruption, using music and platforms to raise awareness amongst young people in their countries and beyond. So they are activists as well. And as it was mentioned, there's a concert tonight. Everyone is welcome, it's free, and it's in a really very interesting location in Vilnius you have seen pictures of. It was very, very recently, it was an actual prison, and now it's basically a venue for artists and for concerts like that. So you're very, very welcome to come if you're staying in Vilnius. We have another interlude, and I would like to invite on stage IACC chair to step to the podium, and the members as well. Do welcome them with a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start this afternoon session on a somber note. 2 days ago, we received the sad news that one of our colleagues, Lavina Banduah, who was the executive director of Transparency International Sierra Leone, had passed away after a long illness. Lavina was an exceptional leader. She served TI Sierra Leone for more than 15 years. And I'd like to ask my African colleagues to please come up. Some of them executive directors that work with Lavina that did a lot of exceptional work for the movement as we express our solidarity with Lavina and her family. So Lavina's work goes beyond Africa. In her quest to fight corruption, she provided a lot of leadership to initiatives in the African Union setup, but also globally. She was passionate about the IACC. She attended the IACC in Washington, D.C. She was looking forward to be here in Vilnius. However, she fell ill and was taken to hospital in March, and 2 days ago we received the sad news of her passing. Lavina, in a calm, composed manner, moved mountains. Lavina sought to build bridges, and our sincere condolences goes to her family and the entire TI movement. We'll miss you, Lavina, and we'll pray for your family. But I kindly ask that we rise for a moment of silence in remembrance of our dear sister, Lavina. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, brothers.
You can stay. Ruben, do stay with me, because there is another important mission that we need to carry on with. And with you is Transparency International Vice Chair Keta Kandriana Rafetoson. Right, and I would like to announce the reading of the motion of the 21st IACC on defending the defenders.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the motion of the 21st IACC. Defending the defenders, the time is now. The criminalization of justice fighters has reached alarming heights. All over the world, we are witnessing corrupt corporate and political leaders demonizing those who speak up, often calling them criminals and inventing excuses to harass, imprison and torture them, or even worse. From the killing of forest and land defenders to the imprisonment of journalists, human rights and anti-corruption activists in all regions of the world, inaction and even complicity from governments perpetuate the impunity of the corrupt. Enormous courage and sacrifice are required in advocating for more democratic, just, and inclusive societies. Dr. Gubadi Badoglu, an Azerbaijani political activist and prominent human rights and environmental defender, is being punished for his activism and investigations on oil and gas revenues, oil-related environmental devastation, and corruption. His arrest occurred almost 1 year ago after he published an article that criticized the country's oil and gas policies. Facing up to 17 years in prison, he and his family have suffered from police brutality. We demand his immediate and unconditional release. We, the global anti-corruption movement, gathered at the 21st IACC, stand together with him and his family. We stand with all of those who, in Brazil, in Georgia, and elsewhere, face harassment, violence, or even pay their lives because of their commitment to justice and transparency. We demand immediate and unconditional action from governments of all over the world to ensure that journalists, activists, citizens, and all those who defend integrity can live free of fear and persecution. The time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if you recall, we did have the initial motion, which was tabled after the plenary on defending the defenders. We, in principle, endorsed it, but we gave room to delegates who wanted to add 1 or 2 words to the final text to do so. And what has been read is now the final text. And therefore, I once again ask that if this House endorses the motion as it has been presented, we kindly endorse it through a round of applause in support of the motion. Thank you very much. I see that the majority have clapped their hands in endorsement. We thank you for your support, and like we always say, we want the IACC to be practical, to deal with issues as they arise, and not just to talk about theories. So thank you for your support.
Thank you, Ruben, and it is really nice to see that it is a conference of action, not just a conference of words. We will speak, however, still, and I'll announce now the closing plenary on democracy and human rights and the siege, tackling corruption's darkest side. And the panel debate will be moderated by former editor-in-chief at La Voz de Guanacaste, current analyst at Transparency International UK, Maria Fernanda Cruz Chavez. Let's welcome her and the panelists on stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Our panelists can come and sit around. Don't worry, everything. Yeah, perfect. So thank you so much for being here after lunch. We are going to try to re-energize you with innovative ideas. This is a panel about democracy and human rights under siege, corruption's darkest side. And although the title sounds dark, we are going to try to brighten it up with our amazing panelists. As we speak, there are dozens of countries preparing for an imminent decisive election and dozens more that voted for new parliaments and governments in the first semester of the year. Just to talk about the continents that are represented in this panel, we have 18 countries in Africa, 14 in the Americas, and 31 in Europe that have had elections or are going to have elections in the next few months. So we are at a crucial moment for the world, and the question I want us to discuss is what is our role in the anti-corruption community in protecting the fundamental rights and dignity of billions around the world. We are going to see on screen, if we can put it on screen, this QR code, and we want to, yes, thank you. And we want we want the audience to respond to this. I mean, we are always on our phones, so we wanted to take advantage of our phones this time around. You can scan the QR code, or you can type www.menti.com and type the number that you see there, and you can participate in this question. When thinking about democracy and anti-corruption in the dozens of upcoming elections, do you think we are? And you are going to see the answers there. So let's see what the audience think, and then in the meantime, let's introduce our lovely panelists. So we have Peter Maurer, president of the Basel Institute on Governance. We have Thuli Mandonsela, public protector of South Africa and member of the IACC Council. We have Tim Hanstad, Vice Chair of the Board of Directors at Chandler Foundation. Welcome. Shannon Green, Leader of Democracy, Human Rights and Governance Efforts at USAID. And last but not least, Christopher Stone, Professor of Practice of Public Integrity at the University of Oxford. So big applause for them to wake us up as well. Now let's see if we have some results. Do we have them on there? In the meantime, while we see if people start responding to the question, I wanted to start with you, Christopher. You are Professor of Integrity, and your work focuses on transforming cultures of corruption into cultures of integrity. First, let's talk about this question. What do you think? How would you respond to it when you think about democracy and anti-corruption in these dozens of upcoming elections?
Thanks very much. It's such a pleasure to be here on this very excellent panel. You know, for me, I think this business is not about saints and devils. This business is about the here and now and real people. So actually, I'm not worried about heaven or hell. I don't want an anti-corruption strategy for heaven or hell. I want one for this world, right now, for people who are flawed, for people who are looking after themselves as well as looking after the public interest. So for me, I don't worry so much about heaven and hell. I worry that we're lost, that we actually don't know where we are. And we need much more honest talk. For me, the most exciting moments in this conference have been those where people have spoken honestly about what they don't know, about what's gone wrong, about the strategic choices we face that have no good answers. To give one example, Jinwook Kim, who hasn't spoken here but is with us, who is the inaugural director of the Corruption Investigation Office in Korea. 10 years of work to try and get statute passed to permit a special anti-corruption prosecution service in Korea. He's the first person 3 years ago who was appointed to a 3-year non-renewable term. And he was able to receive complaints about high-level corruption, only the highest officials in the country. And in the first year, he had 3,000 complaints he received, and he had capacity to prosecute only only investigate and prosecute a few dozen cases. So what do? And he's just today published a paper as part of the Chandler papers that talks honestly about the choices you make when you select as a prosecutor or investigator, when you select which cases. How does politics come into it, really, in the real world? How much do you take into account the newspapers and just what's making a headline versus what's doing harm? Honest conversation. I don't know anything like that paper where you have investigators and prosecutors talking about the real decisions they're making when they're actually exercising state power to try and deal with high-level, politically exposed persons who are accused of serious corruption. That's the kind of honest talk I think we need more of. And that's not a talk about heaven or hell. That's talk about this world full of real people.
Thank you, Christopher. Shannon, you're the person who leads the democracy, human rights, and governance efforts at USAID, and you have held positions within the US government and civil society for 20 years now. How are you addressing these new threats to democracy from the USAID?
Thank you, Maria. It is such a pleasure to be here. Even though this is the final plenary, this is the one I really wanted to be on because we're talking about the intersection of democracy, human rights, and corruption. 3 worlds that I get to bridge in my position, but also 3 worlds that I think are sometimes artificially separated. And I do think that's to our detriment. So I wanted to spend just a couple of moments talking about how we see corruption threatening democracy, human rights, and how we as a donor from the global north are working and partnering to address all 3 of these vectors. So first and foremost, I think it's important to say that fundamentally corruption is eroding confidence in democracy by impeding its ability to deliver. We see all too often public officials treat their jobs as if it's their personal piggy bank, all the while depriving society of the resources that it actually needs for development. I've seen, and I know you all have seen, just countless examples of elected officials driving around in luxury vehicles or enrolling their kids in elite school or even occupying yachts, all the while their population is literally starving. Children don't have access to schools. Clinics are missing basic health supplies, and roads are falling apart. And so we ask ourselves, is it any wonder, really, that people are losing faith in their elected officials and sort of losing trust in democracy overall? I was just in North Macedonia on my way here, and I saw it in action. Frustration with corruption and impunity is driving youth out of the country in very high numbers. And at the same time, the justice sector has about 3% degree of confidence in it. So what are we doing about it as a development agency? First and foremost, we are trying to protect public resources for the public good, including our own development investments. We are trying to work across all of the different sectors where USAID is engaging: health, education, economic growth, humanitarian assistance, to make sure that that assistance is actually getting to the population. So I want to give you an example of what this looks like in practice. In Liberia, we discovered massive corruption in the supply chain of USAID-provided health commodities. And so then we started working with the government of Liberia to prevent pharmaceutical crime, while the Department of State was working to be able to prosecute those who were involved in that crime. At the same time, we were working with civil society and media to improve their ability to monitor their pharmaceutical supply chain. I want to be really frank that resources for anti-corruption are nowhere near the scale they need to be, and it will be very hard to get them to where they need to be, but that's why we need to be leveraging investments across all of these different development sectors to really confront the problem at the scope and scale required. Secondly, as we've seen, Corruption is being used by malign actors to manipulate elections and shape political outcomes. We've seen this right here in this neighborhood. Just last week, the United States, Canada, and the UK issued a statement articulating Russia's attempts to influence, subvert, and undermine democratic elections in Moldova in order to secure results that are favorable to the Kremlin. In Moldova and in countries all around the world, USAID is trying to push back against this and make democratic institutions more resilient to this kind of manipulation through our efforts to improve election integrity. So again, an example, in Kyrgyz Republic, we are working with local organizations to bring greater attention to a deeply seated form of political corruption, which is vote buying and abuse of state resources. I think that much more needs to be done on political finance and campaign finance issues, including working with political parties and parliaments, which I haven't heard us talk that much about this week. Political parties and parliaments are a huge part of the problem because oftentimes they're the ones in the system that benefit from the system staying the same. And they're also a potential part of the solution because they're the ones that need to pass these laws and conduct the oversight needed. And I'll stop in just a sec. Corruption also under human rights. I think as we've just heard and as we've heard throughout the week, anti-corruption activists are under massive pressure. Just a few months ago, right here in Vilnius, Alexei Navalny's ally, Leonid Volkov, was brutally attacked, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Earlier this week, Mary Lawler reminded us that anti-corruption activists are human rights defenders. I could not agree more, but I would go one step further, which is to say anti-corruption activists are democracy defenders, and they are deserving of our protection. USAID is trying to do our part and is surging support for democracy defenders. Through Reporter Shield, we're providing legal defense for investigative journalists who are being sued for their work to expose corruption. Through Powered by the People, we have launched a global activist help desk, a secure one-stop shop for civic actors to request and receive a wide range of support, including training, educational materials, rapid response and relocation assistance, digital safety and security advice, and psychosocial support. And finally, as a donor, we are looking in the mirror and making sure that our own assistance awards allow for the flexibility our partners need to stay safe and pivot when they come under threat. So these tasks are urgent. The things that I've named are not sufficient, but I do think together, if we have that sense of urgency and action, especially in this year of elections, we can make a lot of progress.
Thanks, Shannon. The beauty of this panel, I think, is that we have people from all over the world. And Thuli, you are from South Africa. You have an amazing career advocating against injustice and inequalities in South Africa. You have been public protector of South Africa and have helped write its constitution in 1994. Why is it so important to talk about democracy, human rights, and corruption in the same sentence?
Thank you, Maria. Greetings to everyone, and thank you for the privilege. Just firstly, I'm glad that you said, I have been public protector. I was worried when you said, I am public protector. I have a lot of people in South Africa who are waiting for me to fall. So they would say...
I'm not one of them.
No, I mean in South Africa, who would then accuse me of having lied and said I'm current public protector. But thank you. I would agree with Sharon that we have to think about human rights, anti-corruption, and democracy as multiple sides of the same coin. I start from the understanding that corruption is a human rights violation because at the core of corruption is a violation of the right to equality. The corrupt get better treatment in all of the areas where they have bought favors, whilst the rest of us do what the law requires us to do and social norms require us to do, and we don't get the privilege that go to the corrupt. So that's the first violation of human rights. And the second thing is, where there's corruption, other human rights suffer. In fact, throughout this conference, it's become clear that among the things that tend to collapse under the weight of corruption are human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So if we don't tackle them together, we make progress, but we don't make optimum progress. But I have a second reason why this, for me, is important, is that some of the people that we regard as integrity defenders fall through the cracks when we do not intersect corruption, democracy, and human rights. And those are people that are referred to as graft blockers. Just generally in our anti-corruption narrative, we value whistleblowers, and God, I know, as public protector, I would not have solved a lot of the problems that we solved without whistleblowers. But there are a lot of people that we don't hear about. Transparency International did that 25 scandals, corruption scandals that rocked the world. So we got to know where the corruption happened. But we don't know about the people who prevented other scandals. So we got 25 in a century, but maybe there would have been 250,000. And what I think we need to do as part of this nexus between corruption, democracy, and human rights is demarginalize those who block corruption. In South Africa, for example, one of the investigations was on state capture. Many of you have never heard about somebody called Nhlanhla Nene. He was the Minister of Finance who refused to process a nuclear deal that had not been properly processed through the law and that we could not afford at the time. Maybe you've heard about Mcebisi Jonas, who later became a Deputy Minister of Finance, and he became a whistleblower. Many of you may have heard about Babita Deokaran, who died because of her blocking corruption in the procurement of public protection equipment during the COVID-19 scandal. But the media characterizes her as a whistleblower. I don't think that does her justice. Because my experience as public protector and as a researcher at Stellenbosch University has shown me that those who suffer most, and this is not undermining whistleblowers, are the ones who put their body in line and stop it from happening. The woman or man or gender unassigned person who refuses to sign because there's agency to get you out of the system. For example, a paper I've written, which I've spoken about previously, speaks about a woman by the name of Fifi Hati. I've just changed her story a little bit, her name a little bit. But Fifi Hati was very successful, highly competent, highly commended in everything she did until she joined one of the corruption-challenged provinces in South Africa. And she was at Treasury. When she was required to sign to pay for Air Force shows that are done by the Treasury, she refused because Treasury is supposed to look after money, not spend it. If you're going to do Air Force shows, but also the same department had paid for a jazz festival that up until today had never happened. So she refused to pay. She also discovered that the colleague that was asking her to sign off had a financial interest in the air shows. And within days, she was suspended for being rude and hierarchical. She was still on probation, and she had had a stellar career, 2 master's degrees in the job that she was doing. But to cut the long story short, she eventually was fired, went through various justice systems until she came to the Bar Protector. The report was decided in her favor. She was taken back into the system, but they would not put her back in the same job, because in that same job she would have to sign to allow these things to happen. So why I want people like her to be protected is to increase the number of graft blockers, so that our efforts in prevention are increased. And why is it a human rights issue? The right to work, the right to equality, and various rights of these people are violated. But in so violating their rights, our rights are also violated, because, as I said, corruption undermines equality, it poisons the justice system, and it just generally is toxic to democracy in its entirety. So I will recommend later that I think we have to demarcate. Instead of calling them graft blockers, we should recognize them as a special category and have legal protection for them. Because, for example, in South Africa and many countries, you have legislation that protects you if you are a whistleblower and you have whistleblown. But there isn't a special protection for you as a graft blocker. You have to go through the ordinary employment system. And then you fight a very lonely journey. If I talk back about Fifi Harty, the lonely journey meant she lost her home, she lost her marriage, she lost her children, because when the marriage broke, the husband was from Europe, husband decided to go back home. And it's a big story about also the importance of mainstreaming gender equality in our anti-corruption fight, because men tend to be protected by the networks they are part of. If I go back, I spoke about Nhlanhla, he was a minister. At least because he is part of other networks, today he's able to farm, he's a board member of this, that, and that. Fifi Harty is still unemployed, and Diokoran is dead. You and I can make sure that there's more people that stop graft, but it's not at their expense and at the expense of their families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thuli. But one of the big objectives of this panel is to bring solutions and specific, very concrete ideas on how we can improve lives of people out there who are fighting corruption. And I think you've done that work with your answer. Tim, I wanted to go to you. You're a social innovator. Should these broad discussions on anti-corruption that we're having in Vilnius reflect in other conversations of our times? Climate change, human rights, immigration. You work in land rights. You're an expert in land rights. And how do we get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Maria. And it's wonderful to be here, and it's such a privilege to be on this panel. And I want to thank also the organizers, Transparency International and the government of Lithuania. This is my first time at this conference, and it's been an exciting and inspiring time. And maybe before I go to your question, I want to go back to your highway, the hell and heaven question. I'll bring it back to your question, but I see that most people seem to be saying, or we're on the highway to hell, if I'm reading that right.
Yeah, if we can project it, actually, it would be great if we can show that on the screen, because we're seeing it here, but we're not seeing it there.
So, as someone I'm a citizen of the United States, I live in India, so both countries, one has already had an important election, the other one's having one. It's very easy to get caught up in the short-term kind of trends and where things are going. And as human beings, we are hardwired to pay more attention to bad news than to good news. So I would encourage us to take a longer-term view. Why take a longer-term view? If we're about trying to end corruption, it's about shifting systems. Shifting systems takes time and takes lots of partners and coalitions to do it. So I'll come back to, I am very strongly of the view that things are getting better. And they will continue to get better as long as we have the people in this room and others fighting to make them better. I have the advantage of being older. I turned 62 last month, so that means I was born in 1962. As I look over my lifetime and my career, you see massive progress in the world. So let's look at democracy. In the year I was born, 20% of sovereign states could be described as democracies. 40 years later, more than 60%, I think we're about almost 65%. The number had more than, or the percentage had more than tripled. Now, we've been in a democratic recession in recent years, but we're still over 50%. The trend's going in that direction. If we look at things related to social and economic progress and related to human rights, in the year I was born, 70% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. 40 years later, that number was cut about in half to 35%. Today, we're at about 10%. The right to life. We think about infant mortality rates. What could be more important than an infant living to their first birthday? In the year I was born, 1 out of 10 babies born did not make it to their first birthday, and now it's down to 1 to 40. So you see these like 4x, 5x, and even greater improvements over long-term trends. Now, the trends, it's often 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but let's not despair in the short-term trends. Let's take encouragement from the progress that has been made and hope as we look towards the future. Progress is not inevitable, but it's possible. I think the last few decades have shown us that, and it's probable if we all stay committed to the cause. Now, on the question of corruption, again, I'm a newbie to corruption in a sense. As you mentioned, I'm more a veteran of land rights movement. I will say a couple of things from the land rights movement that I think might be helpful as at least we think about corruption. I also think corruption is, or the movement to address corruption seems to me to be ascending. I've heard many people throughout this week talk about how, back in the 1990s and the 2000s, that we weren't talking about these things. Chris talks about honest conversations. We're having more honest conversations. TI wasn't even founded until 1993, so that's only 30 years ago. That's a nanosecond in human history. I'm encouraged by, bilateral and multilateral lenders who are now talking much more about corruption. I mean, we got Shannon up here, USAID certainly as talking much more about corruption. We have the global governance practice at the World Bank. We have the team at IMF who's been here, and I'm encouraged by, we're seeing a lot more on corruption. Now, is there a long ways to go? Yes, but I think we can hold both things at the same time. We're making progress. Let's be encouraged. Let's continue to look at all the challenges that still exist and move forward. In terms of what is needed, I'll just say a couple of things, then I'll close. One is, Chris and Shamila wrote a paper. It's a Chandler paper, and Chris can tell you where to find it. He mentioned it in his master class the other day, and it's about the need to reset our corruption strategies, and I found that very, very convincing. And there were a couple of points in there that that seem very convincing from what I've seen. One is our strategies need to be much more holistic and need to go well beyond prosecution. Prosecution is absolutely crucial, necessary, but not sufficient. We're never going to prosecute our way out of corruption. The second is the idea of taking an institution at a time to build cultures of integrity to end cultures of corruption, one institution at a time. So changing strategies seems like it's very much needed, and I just refer you to Chris's paper to look at the specifics on that. The last point is one that from the land rights movement. The land rights movement struggled, I think, several decades ago with, is land rights the goal or is it a means to a goal? So I would ask the corruption movement, is ending corruption the goal or is ending corruption a means to a goal? And we could argue about that, you might have different opinions, but I think changing mindsets and views and approaches to thinking about ending corruption as a means to other important development goals is a much more productive way of looking at it. Again, Chris's masterclass the other day, he raised a parallel point about if we measure progress on ending corruption, not just on corruption indicators, in fact, not primarily on corruption indicators, but on whether the government institutions in this context were actually delivering on what their goals were. It makes perfect sense to me. And if you do that, you can recruit more people, allies, other stakeholders, which we all need, into this movement, because you can tell people, if you care about health and you put a lens of corruption on that, it's like an accelerator to meet your goals. If you care about education, if you care about women's empowerment, if you care about peace and conflict. So I would just encourage us to think about ending corruption as a means to other development goals. I think that could help us.
Thank you, Tim. I see that Christopher wants to comment on that, but I'm going to go to Peter. When we prepared for this conversation, Peter, you said, let's not have a 1.5-hour conversation about everything that is wrong in the world, which I think we are very much addressing. And something else that we talked about was democracy. And in one of these panels, my fellow Central American, Gabriel Labrador, said on his intervention that to fight corruption, we need one thing first. We need democracy. And I think you have some comments on that. So let's talk about this, and let's talk about how to reframe the conversation into a different way. Yeah.
Well, from my side as well, thanks a lot for having me on the panel, and it's a great privilege to be with you this afternoon. Look, my sense from the experience at the Basel Institute and personally in other areas of life is that corruption is a global phenomenon which happens everywhere and which is as such independent from political systems. We should not turn away the eye from any place in the world to fight corruption. But then we know that different political systems allow different spaces to fight corruption. And I think it is also important that we value the contextual and local conditions where everybody has to fight its way through the respective political system to do the best to fight corruption, because many of us here on the podium have highlighted the obstacle that corruption represents for almost everything we care for in the world. And in that sense, I would encourage us maybe not to think too linearly about the relationship of democracy and corruption, but also to encourage each of us to do the best he and she can in the place she and he is, in order to give a bigger space to anti-corruption. The same a little bit with regard to human rights. I think, very frankly, the strongly legal and legalistic and compliance-oriented approach in anti-corruption has somehow led us to look at corruption first and foremost as a criminal law issue, and not as an important issue on aspirations of humans to have a self-fulfilling life. And I think that's the reason why we haven't sufficiently thought about how to use human rights and the human rights machinery that we have put in place in order to further anti-corruption. What is the legal content exactly which help us draw our attention to some important issues in the fight against corruption? What is the legal infrastructure, the mechanisms, the processes that the human rights machinery has put in place and which we can use in order to bring more prominently corruption onto the political agenda? If we think, for instance, as victims, it strikes me how much corruption seems almost like a victimless crime. But if we think about corruption as a human rights violation, we also see how much the human rights approach to anti-corruption can be a fruitful and constructive approach to look at better policies for victims. And so these are maybe how I look at the relationship of anti-corruption, democracy, and human rights. And when I have said that, I am still of the opinion that we have by far not arrived our objective with regard to the broader infrastructure on fighting corruption. And when I say the broader infrastructure, it's law, it's policies, it's insights, it's lessons learned, it's operation, it's learning from what we know. And given the dimensions, the seriousness, the depth, and the obstacles that we have in fighting corruption, I think there are a couple of pathways which we have to urgently embark on. We need still in almost all countries of the world to have better legal infrastructure to fight corruption. I think the non-conviction-based approach to fighting corruption is an important tool to inject flexibility and bring us away from just too formal legalistic approaches. And it allows also here to build connectors. I do believe that, for instance, the collective action processes that and collective action as a concept in fighting corruption, because it is multi-stakeholder, it's bringing different stakeholders to one negotiating table, is a very productive segue to strengthen the anti-corruption machinery. Thinking about illicit enrichment is important, and to think about how we can increase and perfect the legal infrastructure so that the burden of proof is not speaking and working in favor of those who try to protect themselves from law. And I think these are just a couple of ideas just to highlight that I find it critically important that we think about the relationship as a of human rights, anti-corruption, and democracy as a non-linear, very contextual relationship. And I do believe that we have still a long way to go to build a satisfactory legal and political and practical toolbox which allows us to fight more prominently against corruption. And I think that's why we are here, to find what is the best way forward and what are the powerful ideas. And I just mentioned a few of the examples, but I think these join other examples which have been mentioned during the week.
Thanks, Peter. I love that we are applauding for every one of you. I think you have very powerful remarks. And to hit off the conversation, when I hear you, I keep thinking about those states that start to be captured by corruption little by little, almost unnoticeable. Or even worse, we know that they are being captured and we let that happen. It is easier. We are confronted against the promise of better security, for example. We are confronted to the promise of better jobs, of a better economy. We are seeing this in different countries of the world, but we don't need to go too far away. In the upcoming elections, our own countries are going to face this complication. I wanted to ask to any of you who want to start the conversation, do you feel that we have the solutions already to this complex to this complexity between corruption and democracy? Are we simply not implementing them? Or is it that we just don't have the solutions and we need to come up with something very, very different? Chris, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, let me just play off, I think, these really important points about not mistaking, about compliance versus, about the trap of compliance, and this relation between human rights. I'm not sure it's about democracy, but certainly relation between human rights and corruption. The human rights movement itself is in huge trouble. The human rights movement is attacked as northern-based, as a hypocritical movement, and we have to be careful, I think, that the anti-corruption movement doesn't fall into the same criticism. The problems of hypocrisy are just as much haunting the anti-corruption movement as they haunt the human rights movement. The human rights movement, to my mind, is actually, as Tim might say, is stronger today than ever. But it's strong at the grassroots. It's strong with the people. It's strong in movements against violations. The top-down version of human rights is suffering everywhere from those attacks, and I think we can see the same danger. I think that so. I think we have to watch out. I think for the hypocrisy trap and be clear we're dealing with corruption everywhere. When we're including in all societies. You see that with political finance, you see it on several of the issues mentioned. Related to that, I think, is this issue about staying with that theme about compliance and corruption. And the Auditor General of South Africa, I think a brilliant public servant, has started publishing an evaluation of each institution within the South African government, assessing separately its compliance and its integrity. And I think her insight that those are different questions, how compliant is the system with the rules versus how much integrity are they showing in the administration of their mandate, is a really important. It's a really important insight. As Thuli was saying, the person who blocks the graft, who refuses to sign, in some ways at that moment, if they sign, the corrupt have complied with the rules. That's why they want him or her to sign. They're actually figured out how to steal the money with compliance. And it's the integrity that stops you from signing. It's not about compliance or not compliance. It's about integrity in that moment. And I think these are lessons about where other movements have gone wrong, where they're subject to attack, and we have to be careful. So for me, I don't know what the right strategies are. I know what some of the wrong ones are, some of the traps. And I think we have to guard ourselves about confusing compliance with integrity. We have to guard ourselves against an anti-corruption campaign that can be seen as hypocritical by those we're trying to enlist.
Thuli, I think you had some comments on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Just on the question of do we have solutions and are not implementing them, my answer would be yes and no. I think some solutions we do implement, and Chris has just spoken about the fact that we have institutions such as the Auditor General, Public Protector, anti-corruption institutions, and the very fact that our countries have not fallen apart totally means there is some integrity in the system. But no, in that the examples that have just been put by my colleagues, let me just start with Peter, who says we need to strengthen the infrastructure. So it's not a choice between do we keep it as it is and be happy, or do something because nothing is happening. For me, corruption is very agile. And this is something I learned as public protector with what Chris calls compliance is not really compliance, it's formalities. One of the reports I did on the point of tenders, everything on the surface looked it was done according to the rules and the signatures were there, but if you looked beneath the surface, you would realize that somebody who registered a company 7 days before the tender advert was closed got 10 out of 10 in the scoring, and somebody had a company that was running for 30 years got 2 out of 10. So it's not really real compliance, it's pseudo-compliance, and they force the hand of the graph blocker, because the graph blocker knows that this is not compliance, you just want my signature, but you're not complying with the rules. So that's one. So I like the idea that we've done some things well, which speaks to the question of Tim, and I think we should pat ourselves on the shoulders or give ourselves a gold star for that, because that makes sure then that we don't become depressed. But secondly, we then say, what can we do better and get ahead? I like the idea of improving our legal infrastructure, our social infrastructure. I would add our administrative infrastructure. Regarding the legal infrastructure, for me, I would like to increase the number of those who block graft, because that speaks to prevention. I mean, as public protector, I know that, as former public protector, I know that there's so much investment in investigations. There's so much investment in auditing. We need to invest more in integrity building. I think our hero should be the Public Service Commission that makes sure that people do the right thing, and there's less matters that go to. If there's somebody from Holland here, I once attended a panel like this in New York, and all of us were talking about all of these big scandals that we had helped to investigate successfully. And somebody from the Netherlands only had a scandal which was about a guy who stole money from a parking meter, a bicycle parking meter that was on. And when everyone was complaining, he said, well, forgive me for coming from one of the least corrupt nations in the world. And I would like us to, one of these good days, to come and say, the big scandals are gone. Yes, corruption is still there, but the big scandals are gone. And part of it is the link with human rights. We've only spoken about how corruption undermines human rights, but not enough about how lack of human rights undermines corruption. Going back to Fifi's story, if there was more gender equality, she wouldn't be less of an equal in this bargaining system. And a lot of people follow the corrupt because they give them crumbs. And our clean governance does not always translate to better social justice. So on the one hand, let's stop corruption from undermining human rights, but let's also beef up on human rights for all so that the thieves don't have the support of the common people. Thank you.
Maria, I was intrigued by your question on the do we have the solution? And I never like to think about the solution. I think what we are is we are capable of finding solutions if we do the right things and if we have the right processes. So it's not fixed solutions that we should look for. At the end of the day, we haven't political agreement to fixed solutions. What we can find is to have the right processes in place so that we come to solution. And because solutions are dependent in each and every context of political alliances, of shaping and influencing the decision-making landscape in a way that these solutions are implementable, are carried by body politics of each and every country. And in that sense, I think I would like to help think us in terms of what are the parameters which allow us to find the best possible solutions in the best possible context. What did we learn? What is working here may not work in another place. And that's the reason why we need this space for debate and the open-mindedness that solutions can be in place here, but can be different in another place, because both can be functional to fighting corruption, to expanding civic participation, to really improving political systems overall. And in that sense, I think what is important in the solution finding is also these constant linkages that we have to build between strategic political thinking, legal infrastructure, concrete operational cases which we have to work through, and then to learn from the concrete experiences also in order for the policy recommendation and the legal infrastructure to be in a satisfactory way moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I wanted to go to Shannon, and also, Shannon, I know you want to comment on what our co-panelists have said, but also I wanted to ask you what is the responsibility of the Global North governments, not only thinking about the ones that have more capacity built, but also about the ones that are also seeing their democracies being eroded. So if you could comment on the two things.
Yeah, great question. First of all, the first part of your last question was about, are we recognizing the decline or the deterioration in public integrity while it's ongoing? And I would say that the answer is broadly no. I think we have anecdotal evidence of it, but we really don't have ongoing, multifaceted indicators that are showing us that there are declines within institutions, showing us that the state is being captured, so to speak. And so there is a lack of reliable data beyond just really trying to quantify the cost of corruption. So as a Global North donor, I do think there needs to be continued investment in research, analysis, and learning. I want to associate myself with Thuli's answer to the broader question, which is, yes, we have solutions or innovations, but they are not often used, not implemented. Corruption's constantly changing, and so we have to continue to upgrade our toolkit. But some of the exciting developments I've seen just over the last couple of years is a broad acceptance of asset disclosures, beneficial ownership registries coming online, e-procurement systems that are flagging unusual transactions, lifestyle audits such as those being used in Ukraine, really strong reports coming out of Supreme Audit institutions, multi-stakeholder efforts like the one we heard about in the maritime space in one of yesterday's sessions. So there has been a ton of innovation coming out of this community, and I think we just need to continue to build on it and grow it. The final thing that I'll say, which relates to what we're doing in the Global North, I think we recognize that we've invested a lot in laws, policies, processes, sort of the legal and regulatory architecture in many of the countries in which we work, and also capacity building. But we haven't paid sufficient attention to the people within the systems and the norms that inform whether those people act in a way that is honest and whether they sign the procurement or not, or whether they go along with it. And that's because within each of these institutions, there are people making cost-benefit analysis. So I really want to endorse Thuli's idea of doing more to protect and really uplift and reward and acknowledge the graft blockers. I do think that there are such brave government employees and people in political parties and political opposition that we don't broadly think about when we think about defenders of democracy or human rights defenders, and they're also needing protection. So then the final thing that I'll say in terms of the responsibility of global North governments, I think we really had a wake-up call within the US a couple of years ago and recognized that, you know, I'm the problem, it's me. We looked at ourselves and saw how much illicit wealth is sitting in our systems legally. It's not illegal, it's not a crime, because much of it is hiding in safe havens, in trust, in real estate, and otherwise in the US legally. And we have been working really diligently to eject that corrupt and ill-gotten wealth from our system, but it's an extremely time-consuming process. We are truly just at the beginning of it, but I do think there has been a reckoning, and sadly it took the Ukraine war and Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, I think, to provoke the same awakening in Europe. So it's ongoing, but we have a lot more work to do.
We've talked a lot about changing perspectives, going from anti-corruption to the narrative of integrity. And also you said something that caught my attention before, saying, well, we're actually seeing in this graph that most people are saying we're basically taking the highway to hell when we think about democracy and corruption. It's not that different. It's not that different. It's a little bit. And you said you are more positive. So how do we start changing narratives? And also, if you want to pick up on the other comments that our panelists were doing.
Let me respond just quickly to the solutions. Do we have the solutions? It made me think of the opening panel when Anita Ramasarastri was sitting up here, and she was, as a professor and someone who's worked on these issues for a long time, was saying, I'm not sure, you know, what the right solutions are. And I think that's honesty, again, going back to Chris's point earlier about having honest conversations. So my question to that very quickly would be, I'm not sure if we have the right solutions, but that can never stop us from acting. I mean, I think I had a colleague of mine who used to always talk about we need to develop strong hypotheses and hold them loosely. And I think that's the way to approach things, and not allow ourselves to be also, we need to learn. We need to look at impact, and we need to continually reiterate for a lot of reasons. But if we think we have these solutions, that's a very bad place to be. But we can't not act because of the information we have. On the narratives, I guess on the point of anti-corruption, Again, I'm a relatively new person to the topic, but as I started learning more about so many people in the room and others, I do see a bit of a problem with just using anti-corruption, because it's a negative, so it's fighting against something which motivates some people but is problematic for others. Also, it just seems like a lot of the strategies, as implied earlier, are over-rely maybe on prosecution and not enough on prevention and education. And anti-corruption language kind of implies that or feeds into that. So I'm not sure exactly what the right language and narratives are, but again, from the land rights movement, there was a lot of effort that went into what types of language, what types of narratives are more likely to gather more allies and stakeholders to make those who are effectively resisting our efforts less powerful or minimize it in some way. So I just think that's probably an area that needs some attention.
I wanted to open the floor for questions from the audience. There's one here, there's one here. I think there is a microphone coming. Yes, so here on the front.
Hello, Grzegorz Makowski, Stefan Batory Foundation and the Warsaw School of Economics. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. I just want to make one short comment, and maybe some of you would also like to refer to it. When we are talking about corruption and human rights, there is also a paradox related to anti-corruption efforts and human rights. There are many examples of anti-corruption activities that violate human rights, foreign agents legislation, extensive lobbying regulations, many examples of anti-corruption central agencies violating human rights. This is also an issue. So I think we should also pay attention to this topic a little bit more carefully, because it makes people frustrated also with anti-corruption policies. Thank you.
Thanks. I have another one here and another one here. I'm going to take three and then give space for answers.
So thank you so much to all the panelists. I salute all of you for the incredible work you're doing. It's David Roden from Principia and Oxford University. I wanted to push the panel a little bit on Peter Maurer's question of the relationship between democracy and corruption. So when Shannon was talking about officials driving fancy cars while citizens lacked healthcare and put up with substandard roads, it did occur to me that she might have been referring to the United States, a democracy. On the other hand, you have states like Singapore that ranks 5th in the Transparency International Corruption Index and is by no means a democracy. So what's going on here? Are these just independent variables? Is integrity a feature of democracy understood in a kind of idealized sense? I'd love to hear you digging into that a little bit further.
Thank you. And the other one was around here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is George T. Hill. I'm a candidate for the Florida Senate, and I'm an American. And I wonder why the person best qualified to answer the question about democracy in the U.S., Shannon Green, was asked that first. And I sat here and watched you read prepared remarks and do anything but talk about the question that's on everybody's mind, and that's democracy in the United States. And so I'd like to ask you to answer that question, and along with everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, do you want to talk a little bit about human rights and anti-corruption? Because we discussed previously about asset recovery at some point, so I think you might have some ideas on this.
Well, I would recognize what the colleague from Poland has said, that we shouldn't pretend that anti-corruption is just in a flawless relationship with respect for human rights. It's a tenuous relationship. And I think one of the important things I would recognize is to frame these dilemmas as dilemmas which exist. We have dilemmas between the transparency necessary to fight corruption and the privacy and protection of privacy of the individual. We have dilemmas between the discretion that authorities need to fight corruption and the legitimate protection of their property rights, of those who are in scope of anti-corruption activities. And I would concur with you that we haven't sufficiently been open and transparent ourselves in the anti-corruption movement that this is not a flawless relationship. And that the cursor needs to fall somewhere, but it needs to fall in a reasoned way, and according to also certain principles. So I would then, to the question, recommend that we do not start to call each other in violation of laws, but that we try to frame the dilemmas that we are confronted with and find reasonable reasonable ways forward to balance these different imperatives that we are confronted with.
No, not a flawless relation.
Maria,
anyone else want to pick on that one specifically, or you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I'll answer this question, but I want to touch on these questions as well, because for a very long time I was working on defending civic space in the early years of democratic backsliding and when civic space was really under severe pressure. And a lot of that pressure was coming from the fight against terrorism. And I'm seeing many of the same dynamics today, which again is why I think it's so important that we see ourselves as both human rights defenders and anti-corruption activists, because that will allow us to see and surface those contradictions and make sure that in our efforts to fight corruption, we aren't inadvertently undermining human rights, closing civic space, or making it harder for investigative journalists, civil society actors, and others to do the work of fighting corruption and defending democracy. So I'm really glad you pulled that out. Equally, I think the relationship between democracy and corruption is complicated. As you said, there are countries that are democracies that are great on corruption indices. There are some that are not so great on corruption indices, and likewise, there are autocracies that do better on anti-corruption. However, overall, if you roll all of the data up, it is the case that democracies do a better job addressing transnational issues like transnational corruption. And then the final one, on democracy in the US, I am a public official, which means that I have to follow the Hatch Act because I have integrity, and that act forbids me from weighing in on partisan political contests. So I actually cannot legally or ethically talk about what's going to happen in the US elections or tip my hat in terms of what are my partisan political views. And I serve our country overseas as part of the US Agency for International Development. What I can say is what I said before, which is we enter in these conversations about anti-corruption and democracy and human rights with a real sense of humility, because we know that we are facing challenges domestically, which is why when this administration began 3.5 years ago, we really started with that US strategy on countering corruption that first looked at ourselves and recommitted ourselves to addressing some of the ways that we were enabling corruption.
Christopher, yeah.
I'd say I think this question about the relationship of democracy and anti-corruption is clearly really important. And I don't think we know, and I don't think it really matters whether democracies or inherited monarchies or vanguard party states are better or worse at dealing with particular kinds of corruption. As Peter was saying, there's corruption everywhere. Xi Jinping has real problems he has to deal with in corruption, and there are real grassroots concern about corruption in the party and in the government in China. There are real concerns about corruption in Oman that the Sultan has to deal with. There are real concerns about corruption in every democracy I know. The problem is everywhere, and context matters. So you deal with corruption differently depending on the political structure. And so in that sense, democracy and anti-corruption are important to hold together, because how you deal, whether you're a citizen or a government official or a judge, how you deal with corruption in your country is the context of the political system will matter. But it doesn't matter in the sense of whether it's a bigger or worse problem for you, or you're better or worse equipped to deal with it. You need strategies in every one of those systems. And there are citizens in every one of those systems who are angry about the state of corruption. And they're just as angry in democracies as they are elsewhere. So I think that I think we can't mistake the importance of the conversation about democracy and anti-corruption for an assertion that there's something special about integrity and democracy. But we should hold on to the idea that how the political system works in any country is going to be a huge, important contextual context for how we fight it.
Thanks, Chris. If there is any other questions in the panel, yeah, we have some questions here. Right there. On the right, yes.
Thank you, John Devitt from Transparency International Ireland. Fascinating discussion, thank you. I just thought I'd make a point as much as ask a question, which relates to how we talk about corruption. And we're still talking about corruption to a large degree in transactional terms, talking about bribery and embezzlement as we should do. But we're not really talking or spending as much time as I think we believe we should on those forms of relational corruption, including electoral suppression or election suppression and gerrymandering. And whilst we've made enormous progress in tackling or in coming together in coalitions to address bribery and international corruption, I believe there's a lot more scope for us to work in coalition to work on those types of electoral fraud and corruption that are posing immediate threats to democracy worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you. There's another one on the side, no? There. Hola, Gabriel.
Hola. Hello. Yeah, thank you. I come from El Salvador. I wanted to ask Shannon, what would your personal assessment be on El Salvador's government right now? There's a huge human rights issue right now there. In 2 years, there have been 80,000 people detained. The own government has acknowledged that there were 7,000 innocent people detained, and there are still in jail many thousand more. So, yeah, do you think your office has something to do, to say, or to the government, or you think it's an other office of the U.S. government's job to do that? Because we feel that USAID might not be looking to what the President Bukele has called his principal policy right now, which is tackling security, and it's doing with a huge human rights abuse campaign. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriel. If we don't have any more questions, we are going to address the two that we saw. So anyone wants to pick on? There's another one here. Yes?
Mr. Prosper from Anti-Corruption of Congo-Brazzaville. So we are talking about democracy, election, and human rights. Most of elections taken in Africa are fake ones. But observers come from international, from Europe, and from USA. Sometimes they endorse those fake elections. Can we say that you guys from Europe, international observers, are also corrupted? This is my question.
Thank you. Who would like to address? I think, Shannon, you want to address the question about El Salvador.
Okay, so in terms of El Salvador, I think the U.S. government and USAID have been very clear about our concerns. both about human rights abuses as well as accelerating corruption. At the same time, obviously, we can all be grateful and happy that people are feeling more personally secure going out of their houses day to day, but that's no excuse for human rights violations. So in the bureau that I lead, we recently sent out one of our deputy assistant administrators to talk to government officials, civil society, human rights defenders, media, etc., and get a real sense of what the situation is there, and also what can we do as a development agency to assist. I think we are using all of our development diplomacy muscle, our messaging, and our programming to try to help to the best that we can. But obviously the situation is very complex. But I do absolutely want to go on record and say that we're concerned about those violations. We've made it very clear, and we think that you can have security and protect human rights at the same time. On the elections are fake issue, I think that's something that increasingly we are all recognizing that there is so much stuff that happens before election day in the pre-electoral period that makes elections non-transparent, non-competitive, not real. And so what we're doing within USAID is really expending a lot more time and effort and energy, making sure that we are documenting that pre-election period, and in some cases deciding if observers cannot safely call it like it is and call a spade, then we either won't send them into that context if there's really not room for them to do that pre-election monitoring and to be able to make a statement that is accurate and representative of the actual situation, or in some cases we've had to pull them back when that access has not allowed them to make those statements. So I just want to assure you we are very much on top of that. We have been talking about the ethics of election observation given some of these trends, and again are more focused on the pre-election environment and making calls as to whether or not it makes sense to send observers, because in order to make accurate statements they have to have access, and it has to be long before election day.
We have 2 minutes more, because we started a little bit later, and I just wanted the panel, if you want to also comment on the questions, but also at the same time, please let's leave a message, a very concrete message that people can bring home. I am here abusing my moderator powers, but I just want that this is the last plenary session, I would like people to bring a very concrete idea of what they can do starting tomorrow to fight corruption with a human rights perspective on behalf of democracy. So Thuli, if you want to start.
Thank you. Firstly, to answer John David's question about talking of corruption transactionally instead of a system, I think it's both transactional as a system. The mistake we make is that when we think about corruption, we tend to only think about procurement. A lot of people, when they speak about corruption, they're thinking about government procurement, whereas corruption affects ordinary people every day, and it's on those everyday interfaces that human rights are violated. You need a child certificate, you need a social grant, you need a house, a social house, and all of those things, if they're subject to bribery, it's a human rights violation, and it contributes to a trust deficit between those who govern and those who are governed. So I do agree, yes, let's deal with it as a systemic problem, but also let us remember that on a day-to-day basis it affects people. On a concrete solution, if I were to draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights afresh, I would include freedom from corruption as a right in its own right. I mean, if I am free from being discriminated, why should I not be free from being subjected to corruption? But given the fact that we're not going to be able to redraft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I suggest that when we teach about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and when we teach about human rights in our own constitutions, we read the anti-corruption message into those human rights requirements. Secondly, one colleague also said when we teach about corruption, we do the same. But just lastly, we talk about an island or islands of integrity. I challenge that. I think we have a sea of integrity and islands of corruption. And I believe that our governments would have fallen apart if the corrupt were the majority. They are a minority, and let's make them feel like a minority. And also, let's demarginalize and celebrate as well as protect the graft blockers. Thank you.
God, you're inspiring. I am going inspired back home. We have like 1 minute, so we are going to continue with Pete.
Well, in a couple of seconds then, two things which I take away from this discussion. It is important still to focus on what is legal and illegal, but it is more important to focus what it is right and wrong. And that's the issue of integrity that has been so prominently pushed here on the panel, and I would fully agree. And to respond maybe also to the colleague of transparency just a minute ago, I do believe that it is in our interest to open up our minds and also to look at fighting corruption as a broad issue which need to look into behavior, to look into relations, and to look into systems. And I think that's what comes critically out also of many of the statements which I have heard this afternoon, but also before in the week.
Christopher, I'm going to start.
Sure, very quickly, I would just say, going back to your opening question about solutions, I think that the solution sitting right in front of us, particularly on this panel, is that what we need is stronger movements, both for human rights and against corruption, and we need greater solidarity across those movements.
Thanks.
I was going to say something very similar. I think if we were to really tap into the energy and expertise and commitment in some of the spaces that I work, development, democracy, human rights, and movement building, this room would be filled, 10 times larger. So really encourage all of us to be working across those silos and working to continue to build this movement.
Team.
So I've been the one who's bullish on the future. And the one thing I want to say that I hadn't said about why, young people. I have been so encouraged and inspired by the young civil society, government leaders, others at this conference, but I see all around the world. I see the younger generations are paying a lot more attention to these issues than my generation was. So I'm betting on the youth and on multi-stakeholder approaches. I think the importance of state and non-state actors working together, taking holistic approaches to addressing corruption, which I see so much more of, makes me quite optimistic that with continued strong efforts, things will get better.
And with optimism, we close. Thank you very much. Thank you for the audience. Well, thank you.